Nikki Carter, a young tech billionaire, and Linda Bennett, a brilliant creative director in the fashion industry, have been married for 7 years. On the surface, they seem like the perfect power couple, successful, wealthy, and admired by many. But behind closed doors, their marriage is slowly falling apart. Nikki is entirely consumed by his work, spending countless hours expanding his AI empire, leaving little room for anything else. Linda, on the other hand, has reached the peak of her career, but deep inside she longs for something more: a child, a real family, and a husband who truly prioritizes her. Over the years, their love has lost its spark. The warmth they once shared has turned into silence, and their home feels more like a beautiful yet empty house rather than a loving sanctuary. Unspoken resentment lingers in the air, setting the stage for a turning point that neither of them sees coming. Linda had always been patient, but lately she felt like she was running out of time. Every morning she woke up to an empty bed. Nikki had either fallen asleep in his home office or gone to an early meeting before the sun rose. When they met, their conversations revolved around business, investing, and new advances in AI, never about their future as a couple. One evening, after another private dinner, Linda decided to bring up the conversation she had been avoiding for months. "Nikki, have you ever thought about our future? About having kids?" she asked, her voice cautious but firm. Nikki barely looked up from his laptop. "Linda, we've talked about this before. I'm not ready. I have too much to do right now. Expanding Carter Tech is my priority." His answer is the final confirmation of what she feared. She is no longer a priority in his life. The distance between them grows further when James Parker, an old friend of Linda's from college, returns to town. James is a prominent luxury designer, naturally charismatic and always impeccably dressed. Unlike Nikki, he notices the little things. Linda's smile no longer reaches her eyes. She hesitates before answering when people ask her if she's having fun. One evening, James invites Linda to an exclusive fashion gala. She hesitates at first, but eventually agrees. She knows Nikki won't even notice she's gone. That night, as Linda stands in a room filled with elegance and laughter, she feels something she hasn't felt in years: attention, admiration, and genuine connection. James listened to her, made her laugh, and for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Meanwhile, back home, Nikki barely noticed her absence. It wasn't until late at night, when he glanced at the untouched dinner table, that he realized something was different. Linda wasn't waiting for him. The breaking point came on Linda's birthday. She had hoped, just this once, Nikki would make the effort. But when the clock struck 8 p.m., she sat alone at the dinner table, staring at the untouched cake. Nikki had forgotten. Again. When he finally got home, exhausted from a business deal, Linda confronted him. "I can't do this anymore, Nikki. I feel like I don't exist in this marriage." Their argument exploded into a storm of accusations, hurtful words, and years of pent-up resentment. In tears, Linda stormed out of the house and into the night, straight into the waiting arms of James. That night, drowning in emotion and too much champagne, Linda made a choice that would change everything. The morning after was a blur. Linda woke up in James's penthouse, sunlight streaming through the glass walls. Her head pounded from the champagne, but the real ache came from the guilt pressing down on her chest. She turned to see James still asleep beside her, and reality crashed over her like a wave. This wasn't supposed to happen. Slipping out of bed, Linda hurriedly grabbed her things and left, her heart racing. As she stepped into the elevator, she tried to convince herself that last night was just a mistake, one she could bury and forget. But deep down, she knew things would never be the same. Days passed, and Linda avoided both James and Nikki. She needed time to think. But just when she thought things couldn't get more complicated, the nausea began. Then, the dizziness. A pregnancy test confirmed her worst fear. Linda sat on the edge of the bathtub, staring at the test in her shaking hands. Pregnant. But whose child was it? Her mind spiraled with questions. Should she tell Nikki? Would he even care? And James, did he have the right to know? With no clear answers, she decided to focus on one thing at a time. She needed to talk to Nikki. That evening, Linda gathered all her courage and confronted Nikki in his study. He barely looked up from his laptop as she stepped inside. "Nikki, I need to tell you something," she began, her voice steady but tense. "Can it wait? I have a major investor meeting in an hour," he said without glancing at her. Linda's stomach twisted. This was exactly why they had fallen apart. But there was no turning back now. "Nope, it can't wait. I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. For the first time in months, Nikki froze. Slowly, he looked up, his usually sharp expression unreadable. "Pregnant?" he repeated, as if testing the word on his tongue. Linda nodded. "Yes." And, "I don't know if the baby is yours." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Then Nikki exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "So that's what this is?" he said bitterly. "You leave, spend a night with James, and now you're pregnant, and I'm supposed to just accept this?" Linda's heart clenched. She had expected anger, but not this cold detachment. "I didn't plan for this to happen, but it did. And I need to know what you want to do." Nikki stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. The city skyline stretched before him, bright and endless. For years, he had built his empire, convinced that love and family could wait. Now, in the span of seconds, his entire life had changed. Finally, he spoke. "Linda, if this baby isn't mine, you should consider terminating the pregnancy." The words hit her like a slap. "What?" she whispered, eyes wide in disbelief. "We can fix this, Linda. We can start over, just the two of us. But this complicates everything." Tears welled in Linda's eyes. She had come hoping for support, for love. Instead, she saw the truth. Nikki didn't want the baby. "You're asking me to give up my child," she choked out. Nikki turned to face her, his jaw clenched. "I'm asking you to think about what's best for us." Lyndon shook her head, stepping back as if his words had physically pushed her away. "No, Nikki, what's best for you?" She turned and walked out of the room, feeling the last remnants of their marriage crumble behind her. That night, she found herself at James's apartment again. She hadn't meant to come here, but there was no one else she could turn to. The moment he opened the door and saw the tears on her face, he didn't ask questions. He simply pulled her into his arms. "You're not alone in this, Linda," he whispered. "I'll be here for you, no matter what." For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. But deep inside, she knew that no matter how much James cared, part of her still belonged to Nikki, and no matter how much she tried to escape it, the truth would eventually come out. Days turned into weeks, and Linda kept her distance from Nikki. She focused on her pregnancy, trying to find peace despite the storm raging inside her. James had been incredibly supportive, attending doctor's appointments with her, making sure she was eating well, and reassuring her that she wouldn't have to go through this alone. But deep down, Linda knew the situation wasn't that simple. She couldn't just erase 7 years with Nikki. No matter how much he had hurt her, part of her still wished he would fight for her. Meanwhile, Nikki was spiraling. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was losing control. Not over his business, but over something far more important, Linda. He buried himself in work, pretending everything was fine, but his longtime friend and business advisor, Daniel Reed, wasn't buying it. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life, Nikki," Daniel said one evening, sitting across from him in his office. "You have more money than you'll ever need, but what's the point if you lose the woman who stood by you all these years?" Nikki didn't respond. He hated admitting it, but Daniel was right. Linda had been there since the beginning, supporting him when he was just a young entrepreneur with big dreams, and now, when she needed him most, he had pushed her away. Then, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, Nikki ran into Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who had been his family's housekeeper when he was younger. She had always been like a second mother to him. When she heard about what happened, she shook her head in disappointment. "I raised you better than this, Nikki," she scolded. "You think money makes a man? No. A real man stands by his family, no matter what. You're afraid. But love isn't about guarantees. It's about choosing to stay, even when things get hard." Her words struck something deep inside him. For the first time, Nikki allowed himself to admit the truth. He had been selfish, and he had let fear dictate his choices. Determined to make things right, Nikki made a bold decision. He started by quietly cutting back his workload, handing over key responsibilities to his executive team. For the first time in years, he prioritized something other than his business, Linda. Then he did something he had never done before. He showed up at James's penthouse. James opened the door, unsurprised to see him. "She doesn't want to see you, Nikki," he said, his tone calm but firm. Nikki met his gaze without hesitation. "Maybe not, but I'm not leaving until she hears what I have to say." Linda sat on the couch, absent-mindedly running her fingers over the curve of her growing belly. The past few weeks had been overwhelming, but with James's unwavering support, she had started to feel like she could handle this, like she could truly move on. Then came a knock at the door. James walked over and opened it, revealing the last person Linda expected to see. Nikki. Her heart clenched. He looked different. Exhausted, but also vulnerable. This wasn't the Nikki Carter she knew, the confident, untouchable billionaire. This was a man who had lost something precious. "What are you doing here?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Nikki exhaled slowly, stepping inside. "I needed to see you. To tell you the truth." James folded his arms but didn't intervene. He knew this wasn't his fight. Linda crossed her arms, defensive. "The truth? You mean the part where you told me to get rid of my baby?" Nikki flinched. "That's not what I meant, Linda. I was scared. I handled everything the wrong way, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but there's something I never told you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Linda frowned. "What are you talking about?" Nikki hesitated, then spoke carefully. 5 years ago, when you had that car accident, the doctors told me something. They said that if you ever got pregnant, it could put your life at risk." The room went silent. Linda's breath caught in her throat. "You knew?" she whispered. Nikki nodded. "I didn't want to believe it, but the doctors were clear. That's why I panicked when you told me you were pregnant. I wasn't thinking about myself, Linda. I was thinking about you." Tears welled up in Linda's eyes. All this time, she had believed Nikki was pushing her away because he didn't want the baby. But the truth was far more painful. He had been trying to protect her, even if it meant breaking her heart. James finally spoke, his voice quieter than before. "Why didn't you just tell her?" Nikki let out a bitter laugh. "'Cause I was a coward. Because I thought if I told her, she'd still go through with it, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing her." Linda wiped away a tear. "You should have trusted me to make my own choice." Nikki nodded. "I know, and I will from now on. But I need you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here. For you, for the baby, even if it isn't mine." Linda's heart ached with confusion. Was it too late for them? Linda sat frozen, her emotions tangled in a storm of confusion, anger, and something she wasn't ready to admit: hope. For weeks she had convinced herself that Nikki didn't care, that he had wanted her to erase this child because it was an inconvenience to his perfect, controlled life. But now, hearing the truth, everything shifted. He hadn't been rejecting the baby, he had been terrified of losing her. James looked between them, sensing the weight of the moment. He had been Linda's rock through this, but even he knew there were things between her and Nikki that he could never replace. "I think you two need to talk," James finally said, stepping back. "I'll be in my office if you need me." Linda watched him go, appreciating his grace. Then she turned back to Nikki. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Nikki took a deep breath. "Then don't say anything. Just listen." He hesitated, then continued. "I know I've failed you, Linda. I let my fear control me. I hurt you in ways I can never take back, but I swear to you, I want to make this right." Linda searched his face, looking for any sign of the man she had fallen in love with 7 years ago. And for the first time in a long time, she saw him. Not as a billionaire, not as the cold and distant husband, but as Nikki, the man who used to hold her hand under the dinner table, who once stayed up all night helping her finish a design portfolio, who had loved her in his own imperfect way. A sharp pain suddenly shot through her stomach. Linda gasped, clutching her belly. "Linda, what's wrong?" Nikki's eyes widened in panic. Another wave of pain hit, stronger this time. Something wasn't right. James rushed back in at the sound of Linda's sharp breath. "What's happening?" "She needs to get to the hospital." "Now," Nikki said, already moving to support her. The ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and rushing voices. Linda's mind spun with fear. Was this the moment the doctors had warned Nikki about? Was she about to lose everything? She felt Nikki's hand gripping hers tightly the entire way. "You're going to be okay," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I'm right here." As the hospital doors swung open and the medical team rushed toward her, Linda realized something. No matter how broken their past had been, Nikki was still the person she trusted most in the world. The bright hospital lights blurred as Linda was wheeled into the emergency room. Pain pulsed through her body, but the fear in Nikki's eyes scared her more than anything else. He held onto her hand until the doctors pulled him away. "Sir, you need to wait outside," a nurse instructed. "No, Let them do their job, Nikki," James said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "She needs you to be strong." For the first time, Nikki felt powerless. He had spent his life fixing problems, with money, intelligence, and influence, but none of that mattered now. All he could do was wait. Hours passed in agonizing silence. Nikki and James sat across from each other in the waiting room, neither speaking. Finally, a doctor emerged. "Mr. Carter." Nikki stood up so fast his chair nearly toppled over. "How is she? How's the baby?" The doctor offered a reassuring smile. "They're both stable. It was a high-risk delivery, but she made it through." Nikki exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Can I see her?" "She's still unconscious, but you can go in." The hospital room was dimly lit, the soft hum of machines filling the silence. Linda lay in bed, exhausted but peaceful, her newborn daughter sleeping soundly in her arms. The past few hours had been a blur of pain, fear, and relief. She had survived, and so had the baby. Nikki stood at the doorway, frozen. He had spent years making billion-dollar decisions without hesitation, yet at this moment he felt powerless. This was his family, the family he had almost lost because of his own fears. Linda stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She blinked a few times before her gaze landed on him. "You're here," she murmured, her voice weak but steady. Nikki stepped closer, his hands trembling slightly. "Of course I am." He swallowed hard. "I almost lost you, Linda. I never want to feel that again." Linda looked down at the baby, then back at him, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Do you want to hold her?" Nikki hesitated for only a second before carefully reaching out. Linda gently placed their daughter in his arms, and the moment he held her, something inside him shifted. She was so small, so fragile, yet he had never felt anything stronger in his life. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Before Linda could respond, the doctor entered the room, holding an envelope in his hands. "Mrs. Carter, Mr. Carter, I have the paternity test results." The air in the room grew heavy. Linda felt her breath hitch, and Nikki's grip on the baby instinctively tightened. James, who had been standing quietly by the door, shifted uneasily. The doctor hesitated before handing the envelope to Linda. "Whenever you're ready," he said gently. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. Her eyes scanned the paper, moving slowly over each word. Nikki held his breath. Finally, Linda looked up, her gaze locking onto his. "She's yours, Nikki." A rush of emotions crashed over him. Relief, guilt, joy. His legs felt weak, and for the first time in years, he had to sit down to steady himself. He stared down at his daughter, a small, incredulous laugh escaping his lips. "I'm her father," he whispered, as if saying it aloud would make it more real. James exhaled, nodding slightly. "Guess that settles it." Nikki looked up at him, his expression unreadable. Then after a long pause, he extended his hand. "Thank you, James, for being there when I wasn't." James studied him for a moment before shaking his hand. "She needed someone. I wasn't going to let her go through this alone." Nikki nodded. Then, after a moment of hesitation, he spoke again. I know I can't change the past, but if you're willing, I'd like you to be her godfather." James raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Are you sure?" Nikki gave a small smile. "She deserves as many people as possible who love her." For the first time, James smiled too. "Then I'd be honored." Linda watched the exchange, emotions overwhelming her. Maybe things hadn't turned out the way she had imagined, but at this moment, she knew one thing for sure. Her daughter would never grow up feeling unloved. She reached for Nikki's hand, intertwining their fingers. "Let's start over." For her, Nikki squeezed her hand tightly, holding on to the one thing he would never let go of again: his family.